Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo, founder of Transparency Task Force, a UK-based but international organisation dedicated to reforming the financial sector. We want the financial industry to be more transparent, more truthful, more trustworthy. And for that to happen, we believe the regulators need to do a good job. Various departments in government, such as the Treasury, need to do a good job, so on, so forth. We do believe that the financial sector is profoundly important to the well-being of society, to economic stability and political stability too. But we also believe it has a very high predisposition to misbehave when given the chance to do so. And of course, the global financial crisis is a very good example of what can happen to the world when the financial industry does misbehave. As you may well know, on Thursday, the 13th of November, last Thursday, a meeting took place in the UK Parliament at the City of Westminster to do with issues of concern to the all-party parliamentary group on investment fraud and fairer financial services. That APPG has its secretariat provided by the Transparency Task Force, the campaign organisation I run. But please note, I do not and will not speak on behalf of the parliamentarians. They're more than capable of speaking for themselves. This is not an APPG meeting. It is a Transparency Task Force meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to give everybody a chance to fully understand the significance of a report that was published last Thursday and the social media activity that has taken place since, and also some of the activity that seems to have happened in the Irish Parliament that may be connected to what was revealed last week. I'm very pleased to say that we're joined today by Lorraine Morris, who'll introduce herself later, Steve Middleton, who'll introduce himself shortly, Pierre, and others who were present at the session last Thursday. And as I say, the main objective today is to share with everybody what that report was about, make sure you can all access the very special report that was written, and also to give everybody a chance to ask questions, make comments, and ensure that you will fully understand why all of this is as significant as we believe it is. The first thing I'm going to do, folks, is to play you a clip that I first listened to early this morning, a clip which I think is remarkably interesting for reasons that will hopefully become apparent very, very immediately. The first part of what the gentleman talks about isn't particularly relevant, but it's really the middle bit and beyond that is. So let's make this as big as I can make it. And please do listen attentively. It's loud enough to hear, but it's not particularly loud, so please concentrate to what you're hearing. Once we've played this piece, I'll then invite Lorraine and Steve and others to pick up the conversation from there. We will be starting with Mr. Steve Middleton, who's joining us on his phone. And a huge credit to Steve and all the others at Bank Confidential, Mark Wright, and also Lorraine, Ian Tyler, and others who participated in achieving what seems to be currently taking place, which is truly quite remarkable. Here we go.
Thank you, Count Corla. And I suppose today does come as a slight surprise to me. After listening to the whispered conversations in the hallways for the last number of weeks, I suspected that maybe Micheál Martin was giving his resignation today rather than Paschal Donohoe. On a personal note, Paschal, I wish you well. You've been nothing only respectful and decent and honourable in our exchanges across the House in the short period that I've been a member of the House, and I want to offer my sincere best wishes to you and your family, Justine, as you take up your new position as the Marketing and Chief Director and Knowledge Officer of the World Bank, the second most senior role in the institution, an enormous position to be achieved and one to be extremely proud of, and to be proud for all of us Irish people, for a politician, an Irish politician, to achieve this. It is something that we need to be all proud of. And I mean that most sincerely to you, and I genuinely mean that. I suppose really, you know, we hear and we see what's being announced today, and I do personally wish everybody well. But Taoiseach, I have to say to yourself, there's an enormous job ahead of you. I noticed that the Minister for Finance has resigned after following my 120 questions that I submitted over the weekend regarding Ulster Bank, but I look forward to having you answer them all, and in particular about what was discussed in the Palace of Westminster on the report that came from the hidden financial credits and mis-selling of large financial funds in the British banking industry, including Ulster Bank and RBS and Lloyds, which was reported at the Palace of Westminster last week, and I'm looking forward to your views on that. But I just say to you, as the new Finance Minister, I would ask that you would look at energy credits. I would ask that you would relook again at the cost of living and the difficulties that we're having as we've seen the rises of the cost of living. Could I also sincerely wish the best to the newly appointed ministers, to Minister McEntee in her new role, and indeed to Minister Naughton, and to assure you, Minister Naughton, that Noel Thomas is already knocking on doors in Galway. He's already talking to people, and don't worry at all about the constituency. Noel Thomas has it covered for Independent Ireland, and there's no problem there. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the clip I wanted you to watch and hear. We think it may be quite significant, and I'm going to invite Steve Middleton of Bank Confidential to, first of all, and we'll take this in the kind of little gradual bits, Steve. First of all, please just tell us all about Bank Confidential. And the next question will be about what is Sir Norman Lamb's role in relation to Bank Confidential. So, Steve, what is Bank Confidential? Thank you.
Bank Confidential, can you hear me okay, Andy? So I've been having
perfectly well
problems,
Yeah.
Bank Confidential was something Mark and I set up back in 2017. We, particularly as I was looking at a lot of these swaps and GRG issues, Mark had a lot of ex-colleagues from NatWest who we'd gotten very well with, and who very kindly would meet with me, and I would talk through what I was looking at, issues on these credit lines, issues on invoice finance, various other things. And we would meet. I met dozens and dozens of RBS staff who would talk to me about how things worked, what really happened, how people really were being targeted to be bust in GRG and everything else. And that was very useful because I was working on a lot of RBS cases, so very useful to my clients. But what we also wanted to do is make sure that people could expose wrongdoing safely, because when Mark had tried to expose market abuse at Royal Bank of Scotland, from 2008 on, when Chris Sullivan, a director at the bank, had put a statement out 2 days after Lehman's went bust, telling Mark and all the other advisors to encourage staff and customers that the bank was in a very sound position financially, and not to panic and not to worry about it. They went around telling all the branches and telling all the staff, you're okay, because a lot of the staff had virtually the life savings in share saves. Most people did, and some hundreds of thousands. One guy in one call sometime later had over 500,000, all his life savings in the share save. And they did that, and within 3 weeks the bank was bailed out. And said that this statement was on the internet for 6 months, and even after it was bailed out, Mark was tasked to train the staff on how to use the statement to keep encouraging everyone to keep the shares and keep the money in the bank. By January 2009, shares had crashed over 90%, so a lot of the staff had lost their life savings. And at that point, the statement disappeared. And Mark spent years trying to expose that. He'd even sent it on to his line manager, who raised it at high levels. And then when Mark tried to expose it, his emails all disappeared, and he was told repeatedly by executives at the bank it had never happened. No statement existed. And he through various pseudonyms and other things, he spent a long time trying to expose it. And in the end, he ended up getting pushed out of the bank after a mental health breakdown. And he was given redundancy when he was one of the top earners in the country. He was on about 110, 120,000 at the time, plus benefits per annum, and always a top earner. And they gave him redundancy, but they made him sign a 25-page non-disclosure agreement. And at the time, he was so bad mental health-wise, he had about 4 tramadol before he went in. He wasn't even fit to do the meeting. The Unite representative wouldn't discuss anything to do with the market abuse. And Mark ended up being ill health retired at 42 years of age. But when he went to Sir Norman Lamb, Norman chased the FCA to find out what was going on. They didn't come back to him. He went back to them later on in 13. The FCA at that time still believed Mark worked at the bank, and within 10 minutes of Norman's office chasing, say, well, what's happened? What do we know about this statement? They picked the phone up, rang RBS and said, oh, we've got this whistleblower, or we've got this employee, Mark James Wright. He's saying that he put this statement online. So literally picked the phone up to executives at RBS to name Mark and his allegations. It was something like 8 minutes after the email from Sir Norman's office. And they thought he still worked there at the time. So you can imagine what that would have done to him. And then when I met Mark had been trying to draw his ill health pension for several years, and they kept losing his documents. In the end, they said he wasn't ill enough to have ill health pension, even though he'd been signed off by Aviva, has never been able to work in his job again, fully up to retirement age. And in the end, he had to transfer his pension out just to be able to draw some funds down. He was abused repeatedly, and I won't go on about my case, but I did a similar thing where I was pushed out of being a financial advisor after trying to repeatedly expose this credit line risk and other issues with the FCA. But rather than welcoming my input and my disclosures and my explanations that all the rules have been breached in the review, decided that I was not a very good person to be giving financial advice, and I faced false allegations, and that ended my career. So the whole point of Bank Confidential was that we would allow whistleblowers to expose wrongdoing, but never be put at risk. And that's what we've done for years. If people come to us, we've had some very high profile, we've had people just below executive level, just below, I think we had two down from CEO, where again, they were getting pushed out, and we managed there. We've gone in and actually done mediations and been involved in tribunals and all sorts of things to protect people who were going to lose the job, and we're getting no money and getting pushed out. And but the way we've done it at all times is we don't trust the FCA. So people come to us, we will put forward the allegations to the regulators. We will never tell them the name of the whistleblower. Yeah, and that really, I know it sounds simple, but the only protection you get, there's no protection whatsoever for whistleblowers in this country. It's madness. When they say protection, the only protection is your confidentiality. There's nothing beyond that. And the minute they've breached your confidentiality, you have no protection whatsoever. So that was the point. We were a buffer between the whistleblowers and the risk of going to the regulator.
Fantastic, Steve. Thank you very much. And the Mark you're referring to is Mark Wright, the founder, director of Bank Confidential, who I believe is with us today. And Mark, perhaps we'll flip into the conversation a little bit later. Sir Norman Lamb. Sir Norman Lamb is a patron of Bank Confidential, which is a community interest company. What's your understanding of why Sir Norman Lamb is supportive of the work that Bank Confidential does? Thank you.
Can I speak openly and a little bit controversially, Andy,
Well,
or not?
well, it's up to you, but the session's being recorded. We will be putting it out.
I won't say anything I wouldn't be able to back up. What happened when Mark and I first approached Sir Norman, obviously he was still in a position where he had been told repeatedly by the FCA that the statement Mark was trying to disclose didn't exist. And I ended up getting involved in a complaint against the FCA. It was actually against the FCA executive and Andrew Bailey, because Andrew Bailey had actually put a statement out there saying Mark wasn't a whistleblower because it didn't happen in writing. He wasn't a whistleblower, it didn't happen. That was in early 17, I think it was February. And I attacked the FCA for naming Mark to the bank. And they said they had a right to go to the bank and name Mark in their investigations. And I said, you had no right, because they approached you as a prescribed person. Your position was to protect the risk. You still thought he worked at the bank. And even if he didn't, as an ex-employee with a pension there, he had a huge risk. It was your job to protect him. And then ultimately, it went on for almost a year, to and fro between the Andrew Bailey's executive team and myself arguing over how the rules work. And at the end of in the end, we ended up going to the Complaints Commissioner, because the FCA said they were right to do what they did. And ultimately, Anthony Townsend, the then Complaints Commissioner, did come out then on our side and say they were wrong to name him. It was a breach of the rules. So they actually had to admit they'd got the rules wrong, and they were going to change the way they worked with whistleblowers going forward. But Bailey didn't apologise, and Mark never got a reference for that, and never has had a reference for numerous disclosures he's put to the FCA. So what happened, Norman realised later on that he'd been duped, because Mark did a DSAR to the Complaints Commissioner, subject to access request. And after being told for years that he was a bit mad and this statement never happened, we found 2 emails in there that basically said, we found the statement that backs up what Mr. Wright has said, and it would appear to support his allegations. So redacted bits in the email. So the FCA, Mark had gone to the FCA. None of these came out of the FCA, where they were from. So he didn't get those from them. He got them from the Complaints Commissioner. So that showed the FCA were withholding key information on that statement. So we got those from the Complaints Commissioner, who I don't think had ever done a DSAR before we did that to them. And we got a huge amount of documents. And then Mark found it. He said, look, I'm not mad. It was there. They found it. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve.
Thank
you very much. And it follows on from what you said as to why Sir Norman Lamb is as supportive as he is for the work that's been done. Now, Steve, because I'm going to take everyone through this kind of chronologically. In a moment, I'm going to ask you about the meeting you had with the FCA, along with Mr. Ian Tyler and Lord Prem Seeker. I think it was December 2023. But before we talk about that meeting, where you worked very hard to tell the FCA all about all of this, you had previously, I think, spoken to the Serious Fraud Office and perhaps others to try to bring to the surface the truth about what we call the Ulster Bank scandal. So tell us what you did to try to expose the matter with the authorities prior to the meeting with the FCA in December 2023 or whenever it was. Thank you.
I started in 13. I wrote to Martin Weekly. I had he wasn't a client. He was actually sort of a colleague, a friend of mine. He was a carpet salesman with a big warehouse, and I used to buy my carpets off him from some of the properties that I had. And so I've known this guy for years, and he kept nattering me to look at this swap he'd bought, and I kept saying, well, look, it's not really my area. I do investments, but structured investments for derivatives, and I don't normally look at that type of thing. But in the end, I studied it, and I looked at it with an ex-banking colleague friend of mine, John Hill. And what we realised was, when we looked at all the documents, is that he'd had this margin account. So effectively, he'd had a credit account in place for his risk on this swap. And I went through the rules, and I basically went to the bank, to the FCA and to the bank, and said, look, you can't sell these products like this. You've sold it in an execution-only basis, because he's not capable to buy this non-advised. He knows nothing about it, yeah? And you haven't advised him. So you just got to rip the product up, because he can't have it. And I started writing to the FCA thinking I was being quite helpful. And to Martin Wheatley, say, look, actually, all the RBS ones have got to be torn up. They've even admitted in court, in cases, we sold them execution only. So I said, none of it fits the rules. It breaches all of MiFID. And anyway, and I was also highlighting the fact that clients' assets, their properties, their security, were actually being leveraged by the bank in their trading. And all the terms of business included wording that in the event of the insolvency of the bank or its affiliate trader, if you put up collateral, which in this case was the SME's property, although they didn't know they were doing that, that you may lose that collateral and be settled in available cash. So I was going to the FCA, well, this basically means if the bank goes bust, these guys' titles, their property, they may not have transferred them, but effectively they will be all caught up in the security of the bank. It'd be a Lehman's all over again. People would be saying, I've got £1 million loan, I want to pay that off. And the administrator would be going, well, you can't, because it secures 5 million in the background there. Yeah, so I started writing about all these things. I kept getting told I was wrong about it. And then I started engaging with David D'Souza, who was the technical head of the swap review, and said, look, you're not running this review properly because it doesn't comply with the rules. So I was repeatedly criticised and told I was wrong on that. And then obviously it went on from then. In 2019, on the Ulster Bank issue, I went to the Serious Fraud Office with Chris Gordon. Neil Mitchell asked me to go down and support him because he said, all about the credit line issue. And I'd been winning cases for customers non-stop on that for years by then. And ultimately I went down, and it was quite unusual because they'd done 2 meetings previously, recorded for like 2 or 3 hours. Chris Gordon had been there, Neil Mitchell had been there. When I went down, they didn't record the meeting. So this was the meeting where Chris handed over something like, I don't know, maybe 2,000 documents, audio files of bank managers in Ireland who he knew well, confirming the fact that when the RBS systems crashed back in 2012, all of the RBS systems, it was caused by a glitch. It was a glitch because they were trying to put a patch on the Ulster Bank systems to hide this credit line fraud. Now, the FCA deny that, but I've had audio recordings from numerous bank managers saying that's what happened. And it's a fact they had hundreds of people over in Ireland rewriting the credit systems after the crash. So effectively, I spent 2.5, 3 hours explaining to the Serious Fraud Office, this is a fraud. You can't put credit in people's names. It's no different to someone going to your bank and taking a car loan out for 30 grand in your name without telling you and driving off in the car. There's no difference. Yeah, they're applying for credit in the customer's name that the bank is having the benefit of. Yeah, so I talked them through it again and again and again. So that you can't do it. I showed them examples of it, and ultimately, it never went anywhere. They shut the investigation down.
Thank you. And tell us about the meeting with Lord Prem Seeker, Ian Tyler, and yourself and the FCA.
So what happened? Obviously I was chasing the FCA and said, look, we found a serious fraud here, and this is where Ian at first thought maybe I got the wrong end of the stick, and he was saying, Stevie, they can't have done that on fixed rate loans. And I sent him over a loan document and some credit files, and literally within 5 minutes, Ian was on the phone saying, this is a huge fraud. I said, yeah, I know, Ian, I've been telling you about it. So he went through it, and Ian very quickly put together a presentation to explain in simple terms how the fraud worked. And it wasn't, as he put in the press later on, not just fraud but theft, because in the Vincent Hale case, they'd actually taken £120,000 out of his bank account to pay a break cost for a swap that later said didn't exist. And so effectively, he put a presentation together. He chased the PRA and I chased the FCA. And it took us about 6 months just to get them to agree to a meeting. And that's when Lord Seeker very kindly agreed to come along with us. Obviously, emeritus professor of accounting, a very clever guy. We told him a bit about it, and we went in and did the meeting. There was about 5 people from the FCA there. We gave them documentary evidence. We showed them the presentation. We explained how the fraud worked. We talked them through it repeatedly. They had a derivative expert in the room, and they asked lots of questions which effectively were not really that relevant, because basically it was about a very simple fraud. And I'd basically said, look, they'd already misled me when I'd gone to them earlier, because I'd basically said, look, did you look at the Ulster Bank fixed rate loans when you decided all loans were not regulated? And they said, oh, the original response from the FCA was, we looked at all of the banks and the fixed rate loans. We didn't just look at Ulster Bank, was the first response. So I went back and challenged that. I said, well, how did you not see this fraud then in terms of this credit line? And then the response was, oh, we may not have been as clear as we could have been. Actually, we didn't look at the Ulster Bank fixed rate loan specifically, was the response. And that I then raised my first complaint back in 2019, which is when you saw those responses the other week, Andy, there were responses to my 2019 and 2022 complaints that the FCA had covered up a fraud.
Thank you very much. And the following summer, there was a FCA annual public meeting held online. If I recall, Steve, they made a comment about the Ulster Bank situation. What did they say, and what was interesting about what they said?
Well, Chris God and I both put several questions in about the Ulster Bank fraud, and we basically said, well, when are you going to protect, the victims of that fraud, and what are you doing about it? Because you said the bank is supposed to be looking at this, but you've known about it for 3 years. I've been telling you about it for 3 years. And so anyway, it was Ashley Alder, the chairman, who he actually referred to it as the Ulster Bank fraud. And then the other executive there were basically saying, yeah, we're aware of it. We know it's serious. We're looking into it. We're talking to the bank, and we're looking to find a way to remediate the customers. And nobody heard a thing again about it until a few weeks ago.
Thank you, Steve. And that brings us up to speed. So did anything happen from then until the summit? Tell us about the report and bring us up to speed until about sort of 24 hours ago, and then we'll cover the most recent developments as a separate bit. So tell us about the report. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of what happened, we got a response that you've seen where effectively Ahmed Al-Adhol from the FCA provided a letter to me effectively saying, oh, by the way, we've done a review on Ulster Bank. Well, no, they hadn't done it. The bank had done a review. So the fraudsters at Ulster Bank had reviewed themselves. And guess what? They didn't find any problems. And what they had found was only 26 customers affected. We had told James Halley at the press, and it was not made up. I spoke to Ulster Bank managers who told me they're selling fixed rate loans to virtually everyone. Yeah, and there were hundreds, thousands of them. and we'd estimated at least 1 billion in Northern Ireland in redress with interest, and maybe twice that in Ireland. And what the FCA basically said was, the banks looked into it. They've been really good. They found 26 people affected by some things, and they've paid out 1.6 million, and it's all been done. And we think they've done a good job, was the response, which I find absolutely disgraceful. There have been that many suicides over there. I met people over there who were victims of the fixed rate loans, who were alcoholics, who lost the businesses, lost their homes, couldn't even talk about it. I mean, it's really, really bad over there, and absolutely disgraceful. And what they also said was, oh, by the way, this credit line thing, yeah, they're just nominal. It's not real. Doesn't affect people. Well, these credit lines, I've been studying and watching people go into insolvency and administration and GRG for years when the credit lines broke the loan to values and damaged the credit grades. So it was a complete and utter lie. And what I've done, because we're pushing for this backbench debate, I'd started off writing. I thought I'll do an 8 or 10 page document for MPs who are a bit more interested than the 2 pages and might want to understand a bit more. But then as I started going back through my old files, I realised just how many files I had of cases back then, transcripts, documents. And I thought it just moved on from then. I thought, well, I'm going to explain how they were using these products to bust people without their knowledge and asset strip them. And I just went on from there. And so I just told the story I thought needed to be told. And what was an 8-page document became in the end a 93-page document.
Thank you, Steve. And congratulations to yourself and Ian Tyler and Lorraine Morris for presenting the report at the APPG's summit last week. And as I've mentioned already, folks, this is a TTF meeting, a Transparency Task Force meeting, not an APPG meeting, but it was great to have everybody attending and participating. It was a very good event. We've had some wonderful feedback and we're very proud of it. Steve, if you don't mind, now bring us right up to speed. What's happened in the last 24 hours or so, including what you were doing at 4 o'clock-ish this morning? Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, Mark and I do sometimes keep odd hours, unfortunately, now, Joe. I think between what's happened over the years and the whistleblowing and everything else, we wouldn't always say we're 100% mentally in line with everyone else. I think it's probably the best way to put it. But so effectively, when we put the report out the other day, very kindly you sent us the link to put that out. So Mark had put a tweet out there about exposing the biggest fraud ever, which it is the biggest fraud ever. And when I talk about 50 billion plus interest being returned, that doesn't really touch the sides in terms of real consequential losses and insolvencies and everything else. That all would probably make that a much bigger figure. And so I put a further tweet out there that effectively said we've proved that the FCA and the Bank of England knew all about the criminality in RBS Group at least 18 months before they went out and said absolutely the opposite. There was no criminality there and no wrongdoing. Now we know it's a lot longer than that in real terms, Andy. We know they've been involved in it back since at least 2012 in the cover-up. But what we put in that report was Mark's group of whistleblower friends sending an email direct to Andrew Bailey with the presentations we relied on, which showed the fact that there was an intent to bust customers for profit, along with naming the signature forgery trainer, which obviously we took that person's name out. We took a name out of the actual email, but we do have the name, and that was reported. So how can the FCA and Andrew Bailey go out in public and say there was no evidence of wrongdoing when he's got the name of the person who was training graduates training corporate managers assistants how to forge signatures, how to extract a signature from what they call the the individual signature verification system. So when you open a bank account and they'll have a box and you've got to sign in that box so they know your signature, and that's what the check going forward. She showed them how to extract that, print that off, hold up a loan or other document against the window, trace the signature onto the loan document or whatever else was required. This was to help customers apparently who'd maybe forgot to sign something. That's how it was put over. You would then take that document, you would put it into the photocopier, and you'd run it through 10 or 15 times, changing the level of turner and putting it a little bit out of line. Then when you finish doing that, you'd scan it into the system, into the credit system, so you could always prove, oh yeah, we've got a signed loan document. So if you were trying to recover someone's property and unfortunately they'd forgot to sign the loan document or security, you could always solve that problem for them. And the fact that he had that person's name And he then went out and said, there's no evidence of criminality. Absolutely disgraceful, disgraceful. And he did that to get the governorship of the Bank of England.
Thank you very much indeed for sharing those thoughts, Steve. Um, I think that pretty much brings everything up to date, other than the 1 million hits on the tweet. Tell us about that, Steve.
Yeah, I don't, I kind of, I'm on and off on Twitter. I do like it because you can sort of speak your mind a little bit within reason. And I found it useful over the years for getting some issues out there that journalists or press would never really be allowed to, or maybe would report. So I put that tweet out there about them all knowing it, and it just seemed to take off. And it went suddenly within a day and a half to 200, then 300,000 views. And I think I put it out, was it maybe Saturday or Sunday, something like that? And then it just started sort of flying upwards. And yesterday started hitting 700,000, 800,000, and as of today, it's just gone over 1 million views. So
Thank you.
I think I don't do loads on tweets, but I think that's fairly good in terms of it getting out there and getting a message.
It's wonderful, Steve. Well done for doing what you've done. In a moment, we're going to go to Lorraine Morris and Mark Wright and others to chip into the conversation to add to, augment, complement the thoughts that Steve has very kindly shared. But folks, have a look at the item I've just put in the chat. This has now, that one, I didn't finish the sentence, has had over 1 million hits. Now, social media is both a wonderful thing and a very, very scary thing. It's very, very yin yang, isn't it? We all agree that, I'm sure. But given the fact that there does tend to be a reluctance by the mainstream media to report on the sort of things that Steve's been talking about, social media in this context is definitely an ally. So we should be celebrating the fact, folks, that that particular tweet has had over 1 million views, because I think I've seen a pattern over the years whereby if something becomes seriously interesting enough online through social media, it encourages the mainstream media to pick up on it and start writing about it. So I think what you've managed to do there, Steve, with your tweet is wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. Steve, that's it for enough from yourself for the moment. Please give some thought to, if you like, the key findings in your report that you might want to summarize in a moment in terms of an executive summary when we come back to you in a little while. But let's now go to Lorraine Morris. Lorraine, please, if you don't mind, introduce yourself, turn your camera on. If you're happy to, you don't need to, but turn your camera on if you can, and just share with us your thoughts about the significance of the report that Bank Confidential has produced. Lorraine, thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I'm going to keep my camera off because
Sure.
my heating is broken and I'm wrapped up in hats and scarves, and just don't want anybody taking photographs of me in my garb. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background on my, I suppose, career history, but very quickly, because there is a website. It's for some reason it's down at the moment, which we can speculate about. But I am a capital markets and derivatives lawyer, and I qualified in Ireland in 1992. Went to New York, I think, in 93, and worked for about 7 years with the French bank Paribas in their capital markets, international finance department. I did the New York bar. I was admitted in 1995, and then admitted in England in 2004, I think. So that's, I suppose, the educational, slightly employment history background. I did head up the legal department in Bank of Ireland Treasury and International Banking, which became Bank of Ireland Global Markets. And when I left there, I set up my own practice, which totally focused on derivatives and derivatives documentation. So I ran that for about 7 years and worked for the likes of Citigroup, UBS, Standard Chartered, Pioneer Invest, and I also had a relationship with my previous employer, Bank of Ireland. So if you can imagine someone's doing this type of work day in, day out, I was eventually hired to work for one of my clients, GE Financial Markets, as head of legal lead counsel, again working on derivatives in Dublin, but using New York law, my New York law qualification. It was from there that I was hired to work on the Irish banking inquiry as an expert to brief the members of the joint committee that were supposedly inquiring into the reasons for the banking crisis. Now, being, I suppose, a lawyer of integrity, I went in as a person who was being paid for by the Irish taxpayer. So I was very curious as to why we had got into the situation that we had. So for all intents and purposes, I was there acting for in the public interest. But very soon after arrival, I realized that the inquiry was pretty much a sham. And without going into all of that detail, which I don't think is relevant to the discussion today, I did have a number of civil servants who were in agreement with my assessment, and they were very supportive of, I suppose, my decision to raise disclosures about all of the irregularities that I had noticed, or that we had noticed as a group. So moving swiftly along, the disclosures were filed, and the retaliation against me, started in earnest. And I suppose when in hindsight, when you don't know what it is that they are trying to conceal, you're just sort of feeling your way around the situation. You do know that all around there are no protocols being adhered to, that the participants that are being investigated seem to be controlling the narrative, etc., etc. So there was probably a 70-page report written by me. I had a number of supporters who luckily had emailed me, and there's evidence to back up that I wasn't a lone complainant or confidential informant, as I was called. So anyway, I ploughed on with my request to have these disclosures investigated by somebody independent. But that did not really happen. First of all, there was an internal report done very quickly without my knowledge. And I had left the office and said, look, I'll come back in if these disclosures are investigated, and that I feel that, they're going to be taken seriously. So I was at home when this internal report landed in the door in May of 2015. And it basically said, in summary, nothing to see here. Lorraine is great, type of thing, great at compliance and blah, 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 blah. So nothing negative about me, but just, there's nothing to see here, which of course I knew was nonsensical. In some of the footnotes, there was sort of a leveled accusation against me of, which was, you could see, was maybe potentially start of more retaliation. So that they wanted to do was to put me off, just, bring me back in and let's get it over with. But I decided that I would push for somebody external to the Parliament that could be considered more independent to look at the disclosures more carefully. They eventually brought in a person called Senan Allen, who was a barrister at the time. He's now a judge on the Court of Appeal in Ireland. And he did the review. It required me spending 5 days being interviewed about my disclosures with 2 lawyers that I hired because I realized the significance of what was going on without knowing, what I know today. So I had a solicitor and a barrister with me. They weren't necessarily banking experts by any means. So in many ways, they were there as witnesses more than being able to deal with the disclosures in any level of detail. So the 5 days occurred in August 2015. So they did wait another couple of months to get this on, I suppose, on the road. There was a very strange occurrence in July where they sent a letter from HR saying, Lorraine, could you come back in, please? And we want you to write a key part of the inquiry report. And we want you to look at the circumstances surrounding the issuance of a bank guarantee in Ireland. So this was like a final attempt to entice me to come back in before they'd have to proceed with the disclosures. And since the banking inquiry had commenced in November 2014, I was quite alarmed to get this letter in July asking me to come in to do this, what was a very significant piece of work, because, you know, that's really what a lot of the Irish public wanted to understand. How do we get to this point where we needed a bank guarantee? So I wrote a letter back, which I'm happy to share with people, which basically expresses my confusion that this type of work was only being started now, when the inquiry had been on since November of 2014, and this was August 2015. And I said that I assumed that it would have been ongoing in my absence. So they admitted that it hadn't started, which was quite bizarre. And so I declined to do it. And I just said, no, I'd rather just wait for my disclosures to be investigated. The interviews were effectively a very misogynistic man effectively trying to have me withdraw the disclosures.
Wow.
Very negative, very hostile, referred to me having left avian flu behind me in the Bank of Ireland. That I found in the transcripts, but I don't recall him saying it, but it was buried in the transcripts, which luckily I received, because the official transcripts effectively show that he didn't investigate the disclosures. He just spent a lot of time trying to have me withdraw them.
Lorraine, thank you. Your testimony is so powerful. We're going to be passing to Mark Wright in just a moment, Lorraine. Is there anything else you'd like to quickly add before we do pass over to Mark Wright?
Yeah, just to go swiftly to what happened yesterday in terms of Ken O'Flynn's
yes, please. Thank you.
video. So again, just to say how important it is for the activity on social media to continue and for all to support each other. Somebody who was following my account reached out to this politician a number of months ago. So I want to say about 7 or 8 months ago, and that advisor to that politician called me in the summertime looking to speak with me and set up a meeting. But between the jigs and the reels, it never actually happened until a few weeks ago, where I did meet the guy in Leinster House, and with a draft version of Steve's report, an earlier version before it was finalised, and with obviously Steve's permission. And I took him through the report, explained in as simple terms as possible what had happened and the impact and the fallout from what had happened. And so this is why I suppose we're here where we are today, where he has submitted these questions. But to be frank, the questions were submitted without the input of anybody from Bank Confidential and without my input. So we're working on that separately, because we don't think at this juncture that it's helpful to have 120 questions. I think they should be tailored. And because our Minister for Finance resigned yesterday, and there's a new Minister for Finance, Ard Tánaiste, that replacement questions that are whittled down should be submitted. You know.
Very good, Lorraine. Thank you very much indeed, folks. After we're going to Mark Wright now. We're then going to go to Steve Middleton for a kind of bullet point exec summary for the key points in the report, which is very challenging, I know, because it's such a forensically analytical, detailed report. But I'm sure Steve can give us an overview of what the key messages in that report are. And then we'll formally wrap up this part of the conversation and stop the recording, then have an informal conversation after that. Lorraine, thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed, Lorraine. Let's go to Mr. Mark Wright. A few minutes, Mark, for anything you want to add in support of what's been said so far. Thank you, Mark.
Well, first and foremost, Andy, thanks for last week. It was absolutely superb. I just want to really add to what Steve said. I mean, he articulated my story very, very well. You know, I mean, I joined the bank and had a 25-year, very successful career with them. I always had to sign on a quarterly basis a document to state that I fully understood that there is zero tolerance for fraud and dysfunctional behaviour within the NatWest Group. Even if I knew about a fraud and I didn't report it, that was an instant sackable offence. So as you can imagine, when I first whistle blew, I had a colleague of mine who worked in group compliance at the NatWest and Royal Bank of Scotland group. And they were basically, if they knew that the FCA were going to be coming, they would basically be doctoring files on advice. One, to make sure that the advice was relevant to the customer, even though they knew they'd missold to them. And two, just basically make sure that there was nothing for the FCA. Obviously before, this was around about 2005, 2006. So that was my first experience of basically saying, you know, how can we basically have an internal compliance system that are basically rigging files? But then, of course, I knew that should they have taken that seriously, immediately the bank would not have been able to sell mortgages. They'd not been able to sell pensions, investments, you know, anything that was regulated. Because it was the actual internal group compliance at NatWest that were actually doctoring internal files, that whistleblowing disclosure. So I already actually then had a target put on my back, and that was, you know, and then because of that, I then had group compliance then manufacture 5 customer complaints against me, told me that I couldn't talk to the customers. But over passage of time, those customers got in touch with me and said, Mark, why aren't you contacting us anymore? I said, well, I can't, because group compliance have told me you've made a complaint. We've made no such complaint. And that was like 2 customers have called me because I see them on an annual basis. And then I contacted the other 3, and all 5 of the customers put in writing that group compliance had actually manufactured complaints against me without their knowledge or anything to do with the customer. But the bank still then wouldn't actually remove those complaints from my record. It was a passage of time that happened. More significantly, then in 2008, when we knew that the bank was having problems, and bearing in mind, I was going out and I was, you know, I looked after, you know, multiple NatWest branches, specializing purely in investments and financial planning. And all we really had to go on was really what was on Sky News, how the bank was in trouble or whatever. And then obviously Steve referred to the market abuse statement, which Chris Sullivan put out, which was basically, you know, reassure staff, customers and shareholders, all is good, no problems at all. But like I say, I was reading that to customers who were panicking. I was reading that to staff, presenting at staff meetings, and then colleagues of mine that had £100,000 worth of shares in September 08. Come January 09, that 100,000 was worth 6 or 7 grand. So that was the second time that I made disclosures. Now, it's very hard for me to explain how it is when you are drummed that you need to understand zero tolerance for fraud and dysfunctional behavior. You have to sign that you understand it on a quarterly basis, and then you make disclosures, which is very, very serious malpractice, and the bank do nothing. What the bank actually want you to do is to actually report somebody taking 20 quid out of the staff tea and coffee fund. But of course, when you actually then whistleblow something that is going to cost billions, the bank don't like it. Moving on just a little bit, I managed to last until June 2012. The bank basically gave me a geographical area for my job that required 3 people. And I managed to do that. Then the point came where my doctor turned around and said, nah, you ain't going in no more. And I was then on sick leave for a year. I should have had a call every week from management to see how I was doing. I heard nothing from the group for 12 months. And then after 13 months, I get an email from HR saying, oh, Mark, you've actually had your last salary. What do you want to do? You can come. Would you like to come back? And yeah, that would have made me laugh. Or you can have redundancy, but if you have redundancy, you'll need to sign this, and this. Now, at that time, I was on 200 milligrams of sertraline, 225 milligrams of pregabalin, 20 milligrams of diazepam, and 7.5 milligrams of zopiclone daily to function. Moving on a little bit, and I met Steve by accident, and we got chatting. And to be fair, and I don't say this lightly, I wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for Steve. I want to make that totally clear.
When you say you wouldn't be here, when you say you wouldn't be here now, what are you saying?
I'd have killed myself. You know, when you're actually fighting an organization the size of NatWest, and then when you leave NatWest, you then have the FCA basically take over and hold the coat, and Bailey moving across and sending me an email at lunchtime on a Saturday saying, Mr. Wright, I do not want you sending any further correspondence to anybody else at the FCA. You email me personally, and I will look into everything. I will do everything, and then I'll come back after I've been able to make a view. I even have an email from Sir Norman stating, well, maybe this guy is a good guy. Little did I know that every single email, and if I emailed him at 1:45 on a Sunday night, he'd email me back at 1:15 Monday morning. And basically, you know, all of the disclosures that I gave Andrew Bailey personally, not one is registered. I've done a subsequent DSAR at the FCA. Every single email that I have between me and Andrew Bailey back and forth have been wiped from the servers. But thankfully, I've got every single email back and forth that we ever had between each other. So I believe that, and I think that NatWest also believed that you know, and they will, you know, I took whistleblowers, colleagues of mine, to a breakfast meeting with Sir Norman, and I put a couple of links into the chat there, and basically Sir Norman called Bailey out for defamation. That was in the Independent. The fact that Bailey had lied to the FCA had lied to Sir Norman for a number of years. And then obviously when I did meet Steve, and I think Steve will turn around and say, you know, at the time I probably couldn't pull a sentence together, but he recognized very quickly what I had in my head. And with all the contacts that I have within the group over 25 years, who are loyal to me, not to the group, and once he started to unravel what was in my head, and obviously colleagues that could back up what Steve had already worked out, that's what enabled us to probably bring the most powerful report ever to be seen.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very, very much indeed. We're going to go to Steve Middleton, who's going to give us a bit of an executive summary. After that, we're going to thank the speakers who've spoken today. There will be more, obviously. This is not a once and done exercise. We need a relentless campaign of truth discovering and truth sharing. Mark, thank you so much.
No, you're welcome, Andy. Thank you.
Steve Middleton, I know it's a challenge, but can you give us a feel for the key messages in the truly outstanding report that's been produced? Thank you.
First of all, Andy, thanks for arranging this meeting today. And it's, in all fairness, it's TTF that gave us the forum to start getting this out there in the public domain, when we spent many years trying to expose this and found it very difficult for anyone to come on board with us or accept what we were trying to expose. So thanks for that. Let's keep it really simple. You know, I've tried to explain this thing to people in 2 or 3 simple ways over the years. It's not much different to the endowment mis-selling, yeah? You know, where they used to say, "Ooh, yeah, the credit are not too happy about the mortgage, but they said if you do an endowment, we think we can get it through. We don't think we'll get it through on repayment basis." That's what these guys used to say all the time, and make people buy a very poor investment product with massive commissions in that were never disclosed, and people end up not being able to pay the mortgage off many years later. And there's very little difference. That was like a tied sale. It's the same thing here. You've got a commercial loan they're telling you to fix it, but what they're doing is selling you a really complex investment product at the same time. They're not telling you about the commissions. They're not telling you about this massive credit risk that actually is unlimited. It's not small. It's not capped at certain levels. It's unlimited. Yeah, because you know, rates can go below zero, and your risk can just go up and up and up. So your credit risk can exceed. You might borrow £1 million and end up with £1 million in credit risk at the same time. So I couldn't get my head round how people weren't just seeing this was such an obvious missale. And when did, you know, I spent my life selling people unit trusts and pensions and investment products to try and make the money. Now, they all had costs and commissions, which we had to disclose. Yeah, it's either a 3% or it's a cost or it's a fixed thing, or we charge you a fee. Building reports, always putting the commission in, always putting the charges in. And then I see the fact that banks have been selling these hugely dangerous products to people who haven't got a clue how they work, not disclosing the commissions and not disclosing the fact this is a huge credit risk. So again, I just couldn't get my head round. You know, it's a bit like me saying to you, Andy, I've got this cracking product. It's really good. Yeah, interest rates are 5%, but you know, everyone's told us they're going up, and you can have this insurance for free. Yeah, we just had it for free. It's going to be great for you. And then when interest rates go down, every pound you lose is a pound that goes in my pocket. Now, as a financial professional, if I'd have done that to my customers, I'd be in jail and not explain to them how that worked and who was getting all the benefit of it. So there was very simple things to me that I couldn't get my head around, people not understanding. These are just like a separate loan or an overdraft. It's a bit like somebody saying, there's £1 million loan and there's a £200,000 overdraft, but don't be trying to use it because we've taken 199,000 out of it already for our own use. That's what you kind of get in here. So effectively, you are buying a loan and buying risk that you're losing money on from day one, because they've all built in this 0.5% or more margin from real market rates. And depending on how long that product is, that can be anything from a 10 or 15% additional risk to 50% or more. Yeah, we had an article in the Independent about a medical practice who were forward sold a swap in 2008 on a 5.2 million loan, with the bank saying, oh, you better take a fix now because rates are going all over. Well, of course they're going all over. Lehman's was going under, the world was going mad. They were going all over on a daily basis, but they're only ever going down. So by the time these guys started, they'll learn a year later on, a GP practice, they had a 3.8 million undisclosed credit risk alongside the loan. They owed the bank £9 million for a £5.2 million loan. And we had the internal credit documents basically saying, ooh, and what they've done is they made them all put charges on the homes and everything else, yeah, to cover this credit risk because there wasn't enough equity in the property. And all the internal credit documents basically said, only problem is, you know, obviously if they do break it, we'll have to bankrupt them all. And that was in the internal files, bankrupt all 5 doctors. So there's a real simple thing here. You're buying risk and you're buying credit risk and you're losing money to an immediate commission on these deals. It's on your loan to value, so you're at risk the minute you take it. You're already at a bigger risk. It damages your credit grade immediately, but when rates go down, it damages it massively more, yeah, because you suddenly got this huge increase in this credit liability in the background. And you might be sat there with a 2 million factory, as per what we put in here, even with £1 million loan, and you think, oh, 50% loan to value, why the bank having a go at me? But you could probably have another 300,000 or 400,000 liability in the background they're not telling you about, yeah. So it was an intentional harm for profit from the bank. And the other big thing we've tried to get over here is this learn servicing side of things. You know, even if you buy a buy to let, and let's say rates are 5%, they'll have a stress tolerance and say, well, we need to know you can cover rates up to maybe 6% or 7%, you know, maybe 125% of actual cost. Well, it's the same with commercial lending. So when you fix somebody at 7% and rates go down to 0.5%, then start doing the comparison between your debt service cover. You're absolutely short. These people, and whilst I think in 06, 07, they were profiteering and selling a bad product in the wrong way, it became quite clear the more you studied it, the minute the Treasury got involved, they saw an opportunity to pass huge amounts of risk onto SMEs and take a huge amount of profit to fill black holes in their balance sheets that didn't want to disclose.
Yep.
So as I say in the report, had they come to the public and said, and they ran this lie for years, oh, we had to put 42 billion in, oh, to save Lloyds and RBS. And we did a meeting with Andrew Bailey and Sir Norman Lamb in Portcullis House. And Mark will tell you to this day, what everyone remembers is, all full of himself, we're talking about RBS and their behaviour. And Andrew Bailey says, and it's his wording, do you know what would have happened if I hadn't have given RBS, not the country, not the bank, if I hadn't given RBS that 25 billion, and my words were, yes, I know exactly what would have happened, Andrew, but it wasn't 25 billion, was it? It was more like 1 trillion. And the room just went quiet. And nobody said anything, and then they just moved on. Nobody said, you're wrong, that's mad, stupid. But that was the size of what was happening. The black holes in Lloyds and RBS's balance sheets from this gambling they'd done off the back of SME's assets, which is absolutely appalling, was 600-700 billion. It wasn't 42 or 25. And it was more than that. You know, the height of the crisis, we were covering the banks for 1.2 trillion of risk. Yeah. And what I get sick of hearing these days, I say 50 billion plus interest, that's nothing compared to what the real losses are. So everyone will go, oh, don't say that, Steve. Oh, goodness me, we'll ruin the economy, or we'll ruin the financial system, we'll never survive this. Well, if we could back the banks for 1.2 trillion, and we now know they've stolen hundreds of billions of SMEs, how much are we going to back the SMEs?
Yeah.
Will the country be better off if we give 100, 200, 300 billion back from the banks who stole it? And let's be right, you can't call mis-selling. If I come to your house and you've got a safe and you've got £1 million in it, and I steal £1 million, yeah, and the police come to me and I say, well, thing is, yeah, I needed it for my business, so I'll give them a couple of 100,000 back, but I can't give them more than that because that damaged my business. What planet are we living on where we suggest money that's been stolen from businesses should not be given back?
Brilliant.
And I think that's the crux of it, Andy. These people are driven to suicide, lost their businesses, lost their homes, lied to, cheated, covered up for years. It's time for some justice.
Mr. Middleton, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you so much. We're going to jump to Mark Wright. I'm then going to make a formal statement. Then we're going to bring this part of our meeting to a close. Mr. Mark Wright.
Yeah, it was only I suddenly thought, because this is recorded, and I thought to myself, well, anybody that's listened to this now or listen to this later on, how did my medical records appear on the FCA's servers? And I'll tell you the reason why. Firstly, my medical records somehow, and we got this through a DSAR, Steve will back this up, because Steve actually went to Andrew Bailey and asked who sent my medical records to the FCA, all doctored, but it was to make out that I was some loon ball, that, oh, to totally discredit. But my medical records that are sacred not only ended up in NatWest's hands, but they actually ended up in the FCA's hands. And I think the email response, and Steve might tell me differently, the email response is, oh, we appear to have got your medical records sent to us in error. Steve asked the question, well, who were they sent to? Oh, we don't know, because they were deleted straight away. But my medical records ended up at the FCA, and they were doctored.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very, very much indeed, Mark. I often wonder if I can be any more shocked than I have been, and then something happens that shocks me even more. I'm going to ask my colleague Alexandra to do something. Alexandra, please tune into this bit. Please liaise with Mark and Steve and identify every organisation mentioned in the report. Put a database together for me of the chairman and chief executive of every organisation in the report, including the Financial Conduct Authority and the Financial Conduct Authority's chairman and chief executive. I will then email a link to the recording of this meeting to the chairman and chief executive of every one of those organisations, including the Financial Conduct Authority, i.e. all the banks mentioned, etc., with a genuine invitation that if they believe anything that has been stated in this meeting that is not factually correct, and they can evidence that it is not factually correct, I will, in good faith, correct the record. We are producing this meeting today in the public interest, in good faith, and if anything has been stated in this meeting that is not factually correct, we will gladly correct the record. Ladies and gentlemen, can I please invite you to show your appreciation to Mr. Steve Middleton, Mr. Mark Wright, Lorraine Morris, and everybody else involved in the production of what we hope is going to be a report that forces the truth to the surface and holds people accountable. Thank you very much indeed, Mark, Steve, Lorraine, and others.